Hello and welcome to Politics at Jack and Sam's Daily, the podcast that brings you everything you need to know in one shot about the election campaign trail ahead.
One tequila shot maybe at this stage. We can see celebrating. There are now only 8 days to go. My name is Jack Blanchard. With me is Sam Coates. And Sam, the election was called 5 weeks ago today. Hasn't time flown? I know you've enjoyed it almost as much as me. And for a podcast that is supposed to have wonderful powers of foresight, there we were sat there merrily yesterday saying, oh, there's no news today, it's a bit boring today, it's all stopped for the Japanese emperor. And that was a foolish thing to say, wasn't it?
I thought, yeah, that's right. We thought we'd run out of the news, boring. But it all revved up by mid-morning with the announcement that Rishi Sunak was suspending those two candidates embroiled in the election scandal, and the day kind of tumbled down from there. So we were scrambled once again into work. One more day sitting at home before I go off on my travels with, I have to say, coffee with the milk's off. It's disgusting. I'm not enjoying the taste in my mouth this morning. Luckily, I think the news is going to give us a better taste. What have you got for us this morning, Jack?
Today we have the big event will happen this evening in Nottingham. It is the final head-to-head debate between the two main leaders, Keir Starmer and Rishi Sunak. That will be on BBC One at 8:15, and there will be millions of people tuning in. That is a big moment, perhaps the last big moment of this campaign. So we'll be teeing that one up. We need to talk even more about gambling, Gamblegate, Bettinggate, whatever you want to call it. The greatest election scandal I can ever remember, which has dominated a news cycle for the entire week, maybe even longer. We'll be doing more on that today. And we want to talk about net zero is the other thing, because Reform UK going big on that today. Richard Tice, the former leader, I've forgotten what his job is now, is Nigel Farage sidekick type role, is up in Grangemouth talking about net zero, and that is a very interesting thing.
He's not going to like you where you just introduced him.
Sorry, Richard. It's a very interesting topic for Reform UK to be getting into, net zero, so we will get into that as well. So 3 big things for you as always this morning, but the big one, of course, tonight is the BBC One head-to-head debate between Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer. It's live on air 8:15 until 9:30, an hour and a quarter of your viewing pleasure. You have got the Euros on the other channel if you prefer, but I think there will be millions of people watching this one, Sam, and it's really feels like Rishi Sunak's last chance, if it even is a chance, to try and do something in this campaign, which has gone so horribly wrong for the Conservative Party over the past few weeks. As we've said before, there aren't that many moments when the nation does sort of tune into an election campaign en masse, but I think a primetime BBC One head-to-head debate is very much that, and it has always been penciled in as being that for this moment, just over a week before polling day. Has Rishi Sunak got any chance tonight? Is there anything he can do that could change this picture at all?
Well, this is the one bit of the election campaign that went really quite well for the Conservatives. So it is a format that I think certainly Conservative headquarters thinks favours them. They were pushing for more such head-to-head moments through the campaign. They didn't get them because Keir Starmer didn't want them. And Keir Starmer sort of facing a Tiggerish, quite sort of aggressive Rishi Sunak is probably his least favourite thing. I mean, your question is, can things really turn around? I'm gonna throw some polling numbers at you, Jack, because we've got some new numbers from YouGov for Sky. So while people are pretty much even Stevens about how well Keir Starmer's campaign has gone, only 7% of people think that Rishi Sunak's campaign has gone well, and 67% of people think that Rishi Sunak's campaign has gone badly. So can 1 hour 15 minutes sort of upend that kind of weight of opinion? It feels very hard.
Can I please meet the 7% of people who think the Tory campaign has gone well over the last 5 weeks? Who are these 7% of people, and what have they been watching? Maybe they love the rain-soaked announcement in Downing Street. They were delighted he ran away from the D-Day thing halfway through, and they thought gambling on the election is a brilliant idea for people close to Rishi Sunak to be involved in. What a wonderful, jolly 7% of the population you've managed to find there. Yeah, I mean, the people are talking about this Tory campaign like it's the worst of all time. I think that's that's possibly pushing it a little bit. You know, if you think back to Theresa May in 2017, just in recent memory, someone who was very much expected and the overwhelming favourite to win an election and managed to blow the entire thing up in a few weeks. It hasn't been like that. Rishi Sunak was always facing a very, very difficult situation. Some would say he never had a chance of winning this, but I mean, it clearly hasn't gone well by any measure. You talk to people in or very close to the campaign, they will tell you it obviously hasn't gone as we expected, they would say, or hoped, through sort of gritted teeth. But there's still, I do think there is still a chance, and it's more likely to be something that Keir Starmer does than Rishi Sunak does that would change the course of this at least a little bit. I'm not saying turn it around and give the Tories victory, but were Keir Starmer to finally drop the Ming vase that he's been carrying carefully tonight, a terrible answer or something, or a really difficult moment, those moments can crystallise, especially in social media age. The clip gets circulated. Just think of that thing on LBC Radio when he was asked about Gaza last year, and he gave a very clumsy answer, if you want to be generous, and he's never heard the end of it, and it's definitely cost Labour votes. It might cost them seats. These sorts of moments can still happen, but you know, he's had a fair few of these debates, or different versions of them, over the last few weeks. Keir Starmer, he hasn't dropped the ball. He'll feel pretty confident going into this that he's got his answers on pretty much everything down to pat. So it feels unlikely to me that that's going to happen.
I'm going to throw one more polling set of numbers because we are coming to the end of the campaign, so it's squeaky bum time for the pollsters, and we've got the last of the voting intentions from YouGov, and that has what's really interesting about that is there just has been no narrowing in the polls. So you've now got the Tories on 18. It's been crossover again, just ahead of Reform on 17. But what's really interesting, and I don't quite know how this is going to play out, is that Labour is noticeably, even more than the margin of error, below 40%. The last voting intention from YouGov has them on 36. And one of the stories of this campaign is just how Labour's, you know, the proportion of people saying to pollsters they're going to vote Labour has drifted down and down and down. You know, largely the Greens and the Lib Dems are the beneficiaries on 8% and 15% respectively. But how that translates into seats, well, next week we will get the final YouGov MRP, their big call, the thing that their entire multi-billion pound corporate reputation rests on. So they better get that right. But the numbers don't tell a completely clear picture even at this stage, and it is interesting to look at that Labour number even now.
It really is. I mean, 36% in a general election is not what you think of a party that's about to win a landslide at all. That is not a big number. And it does tell you something about the lack of love for Labour around the country, which, you know, we've got our playbook writers, Politico, out on tour at the moment, driving around the country, going to lots and lots of different seats, talking to people. They all say the same thing. Everywhere they go, nobody is excited about Labour. There is no wave of delighted optimism the way that people used to talk about it in 97. I have no idea whether it was actually true in 97, but that's certainly the sort of myth that's built up around that now. That is not happening out in the country, and I think Keir Starmer's aides would admit that.
Absolutely, 50% of people think Keir Starmer's going to be a bad Prime Minister. So they're going to put him in, possibly in record numbers, and then sit back with their arms folded, going, go on, impress me then. I mean, it's that plus the financial backdrop, plus all the challenges. It's going to be tough from July the 5th if he gets in. It's going to be really, really, really hard. Let's talk about something else hard, gambling.
It's certainly hard for the Conservatives in particular. I mean, this story is I mean, we did spot it straight away as a big one when it first broke a couple of weeks ago. But at the time, the Craig Williams story, brilliantly broken by The Guardian, seemed like an isolated incident, just an incredible, as he put it, I've forgotten how he put it, but he certainly described it as a gaffe or an error of judgment, didn't he? But it seemed like a one-off. You know, now it's a week since the BBC revealed that no more people were implicated, and then more people were implicated. And last night we heard a fifth Conservative, like in a senior position, appears to be implicated or is at least being investigated in this scandal. And the question is, how many more are there to come? I mean, this story has completely dominated a week of the news agenda now, just like D-Day dominated an entire week of the news agenda. I mean, to talk about opportunity cost for the Conservatives, who were supposed to be hammering Labour on tax, all that we ever talk about now is who else might have been betting on the election. And the picture for the general public is just absolutely disastrous in terms of how they view politics, politicians, how they view the Conservative Party in particular. And, this idea that really came up particularly during the expenses scandal way back in 2008 and has never really gone away, which is that they're all in it for themselves, they're all out for themselves, they treat it as a game, they're trying to line their pockets. What could be a more stark illustration of that to the watching public than this scandal? And I do think it's one that will not be forgotten for a long time, and I do think Labour will be wanting to hammer the Conservatives with it again and again, not just this week and next week, but for months after the election. Although, of course, rather unfortunately for Keir Starmer, we now have a Labour candidate who's in a slightly different way been implicated in it as well.
That's right. I mean, it's important to pick through the bits of this. This story's expanding and getting quite complicated. And there are a number of dimensions that are kind of very, very relevant to the general election. So yesterday, just before lunchtime, Rishi Sunak finally, after days and days and days, suspended Craig Williams, his very, very close aide. We found footage of Craig Williams and Rishi Sunak palling around with Rishi Sunak saying, "I spend every day with Craig Williams." That's how close they genuinely were. So he was suspended. Laura Sanders, the Bristol North West Tory candidate, was suspended. And Labour sent out a gleeful Pat McFadden, their campaign chief, to kind of hammer home the political advantage. Only then, a few hours later, to have to announce that they too were suspending a candidate. But as you say, Jack, this is for something slightly different. Kevin Craig, a Suffolk candidate who happens to be a lobbyist, was suspended after the Gambling Commission informed Labour that they were investigating him. What he's being investigated for is very different. It is he put a bet on his own performance in the election to lose, right? He calculated, or he put money on him not winning at the general election, because he says that's what he thought was the most likely outcome, and he claims that he was going to give the money that he was likely to win, or he believed he was likely to win, to charity. And the Gambling Commission, have found his name on their lists of people who placed bets, and therefore informed Labour that he's being investigated, and therefore Labour have suspended him. You can just imagine how furious they are in Labour HQ over this, because it completely queries the pitch. It makes it just that much harder. It allows they're all at it, they're all in it together, plague on all their houses argument to be rolled out, and a kind of weary public, the fear is a weary public, just sort of sit back and go, oh God, we knew they were all at it. I have to say, it looks to me as if this is of a sort of slightly different order of magnitude politically from what's going on with the Tories, because in order to mount an allegation, in order to run a charge that it's effectively insider trading, which is the thing that's wrong, you basically would need to prove that this guy was going to throw the electoral race, and that's quite a thing to prove. So I think definitely, from the Labour folk I was talking to last night, this guy gets many, many, many moron points, and they're absolutely furious at the political damage he's done. I'm not quite sure it can be linked to a wider pattern if the facts are as we understand.
And we have other people implicated as well now, including an actual cabinet minister, Alistair Jack, the Scottish secretary, who has said he did bet on election dates, but appears to have done it some time ago, and so is suggesting that this again is a different thing, because he didn't have a clue when Rishi Sunak was going to call the election when he did, and he put several bets on, and one was correct and others were wrong.
And he says he didn't break the law very, very firmly.
Break the law. And also a Conservative member of the Welsh Parliament is also now being investigated. That's along with various police protection officers or people who work closely within the police force. It goes on and on and on, and we are going to be talking about this again and again and again, and it's going to come up at the debate tonight, and there's going to be more news on it tomorrow, and it is sucking any chance the Tories had of trying to change the narrative of this campaign in its final throes. I just want to talk a little bit about the Reform Party, because they of course are one of the other big stories of this election. I don't think anybody thought when Rishi Sunak stood in the rain calling it that Reform would be such a big deal in this election, but of course Nigel Farage has made them so, and we saw pictures of him in the pub last night with his England shirt on, pretending to like football and cheering on the England team in the pub. But today his whatever he is, former leader, Richard Tice.
He's the chairman. I've just been Googling
chairman.
Richard Tice is the chairman of Reform UK.
My apologies to Richard Tice. You're not yesterday's man. You are still the chairman of Reform. Anyway, he's in Scotland talking about the oil and gas industry, but more interesting than the oil and gas industry, to me, he's talking about net zero, because Reform now a mainstream party? I guess they are, given the way they are in the polls. Reform are now Britain's only mainstream party which are diametrically opposed to the net zero climate target, one of the biggest policy pledges of decades, frankly. Perhaps the biggest legacy this 14 years of Conservative leadership is actually going to bequeath us, which is this commitment to completely transform Britain's energy sector, in fact the entire economy, over the next 25 years to remove all carbon emissions on a net basis. Reform are against that, and there has been basically a political consensus on net zero in this country for a long time, that basically these climate targets are the right thing to do. When Theresa May announced net zero at the very end of her premiership, it was waved through by Parliament almost on the nod with very little debate. That is changing now. Rishi Sunak nodded to it when he started to move the Tories in a slightly more sceptical direction last year, but Reform are very, very anti-net zero, and you can see this becoming one of the big debates of the next Parliament, assuming Labour do win. The Tories do lurch to the right after a leadership contest, which is what most people expect to happen. Then you can see net zero becoming a big dividing line between the parties, with Reform and perhaps a new look Conservative Party on one side, and Labour having to defend this very, very difficult and very, very expensive transition while in government. And that to me looks like a very difficult political situation for Keir Starmer, and I don't think he'll be, well, I don't suppose he'll be watching Richard Tice's press conference, but if he was, I don't think he'd be enjoying it very much if he's far-sighted enough to see where this is headed. You can see in other countries that the climate debate gets very, very polarised, and we haven't had that here, but it does feel to me like that is coming down the track.
So will the Tories end up with a new leader after the election that also junks net zero? That's one massive question. But I also think that net zero is going to be problematic for Labour. One of the most painful things to watch was what Labour did with that £28 billion a year commitment to invest in green projects, which it ended up junking, but only after 5 months of torturous negotiations. I think this is partly about how difficult green choices will be for Labour, but it also speaks to how difficult decision-making might end up seeming under a Keir Starmer premiership. They didn't make that decision cleanly and swiftly. It is in part because Keir Starmer does not like conflict. Well, good luck with that management style, because you're going to have a lot of competing interests to arbitrate between as Prime Minister, and not liking conflict isn't a great trait as a Prime Minister, because you're going to just have to pick a side the whole time. I'm going to pick a side, and that's to end this podcast, because it's time and you've all had enough of us. So I'm off to Nottingham for the debate, and look forward to seeing you from another hotel room with hopefully not sour milk in the morning.
Once more into the spin room breach he goes. Good luck, Sam. Have a great time. I will look forward to chatting to you tomorrow. Cheers.